Hey, what's up guys? For those of you that don't know me, I have been a Challenger player since set 3, and in this video I'm going to be giving you guys a Headliner 13.25 tier list. I have already released a comps guide for this patch, but I realized that I didn't really talk too much about the headliners. I think that a lot of players really struggle on what headliners to buy and when they should swap out their headliner in the mid or late game. So in this video, I have a tier list for all of the 1 costs, 2 costs, 3 cost headliners, 4 costs, and 5 costs. For each headliner, I also have an explanation on what comp you want to play. So for example, if you get Blitzcrank, you generally want to be playing towards Ari if possible. I also have like best in style for each headliner. And if it's an early game headliner, I have the situations in which you want to buy them and also what items you want to slam in this scenario and what comps you want to angle towards if you have that specific headliner. So before I jump into this though, let's talk a little bit about the headliner mechanic and how to play around it in the current meta. So in the early game, I would recommend that you be extremely selective about the headliner you want to buy. The reason for this is really simple. If you just settle for like a random headliner, chances are you're going to buy like the shitty Evelyn or Jinx headliner and you're just going to lose most of your fights anyway. But the downside to already having a headliner is that you don't see a headliner in every shop. If you already have a headliner, you're going to see one every 4 shops instead. So if you just buy like a shitty headliner and you're just going to lose anyway, you might as well just not buy a headliner at all and just full open, because at least then you'll see a headliner every shop and have a chance at coming back in the mid game. So that's the first thing. Basically, if you have like a shit opener, shit headliner, I would seriously just full open until 3-2 and play for the 3-2 spike. If you have a playable opener, then you could just buy like the headliner and play to save HP. And if the headliner gets outscaled at stage 3-2, I'll get into that later, you generally want to sell that headliner and roll for a new one at 3-2 and then go for it, and then go level 8 at 4-2. And final tip is that at level 8, you almost always want to sell your headliner and roll for a 4 cost one, because you're guaranteed to hit a decent 4 cost within 10 to 20 gold, and that will save you like infinite HP to try to go 9. And one small thing is that I am streaming right now by the time I post this video. If you have any questions, feel free to check out my stream. And also I have another YouTube channel where I post VODs and where I add detailed commentary on all my games. So feel free to check it out and subscribe if you can. And let's get right into the tier list. Alright, so let's get into the 1 cost headliners first. Before I jump into it, take note that this tier list only applies for stages 1-2 to 2-3. 2-3 is relevant because by the time it's stage 2-3, you will naturally level to 4, and at level 4 you will have a chance of seeing a 2 cost headliner instead. Any stage after this, you really don't want to be settling for a 1 cost headliner, that's why it's stage 2-3. But other than that, let's jump right into the tier list. In the S tier, we have Corki, Cassante, and Annie. Corki is probably the strongest 1 cost AD carry right now. He's a really good item holder for stuff like red buff, blue buff, death blade, IE. And these items play really well into the AD tree at level 8. That's why he's S tier. Corki is one of the only carries in the game that are 1 cost that scales all the way until stage 4-2. He has built-in anti-heal, and he's really good at killing off units to save you HP to get to level 8. In the S tier is also Cassante. Heartsteel Cassante is S tier. The Sentinel one is not as good. The reason why he's S tier is because you only need to find 1 set, 1 Yone or 1 Aphelios to get 3 Heartsteel in. If you get 3 Heartsteel in at level 3, after 4 stages, you get 6 gold, but that 6 gold scales into like 15 gold at level 8, which is basically 7 to 8 extra rolls at 4-2, which is fucking broken. Annie is S tier. Emo Annie is S tier. This opens you up to reroll Annie, which is really, really strong if you have the opener for it. Otherwise, Annie is also S tier because you actually just tempo into... You could play tempo Annie into R8, 6 Sentinel, which is the most broken level 8 comp right now. Really good item holder for Annie, blue buff, Nashers, and Gunblade. And yeah, these 3 are almost auto picks for me. In the A tier, I would pick up one of these if it fills in a gap in your team, and you could play around the streak. So what I mean by gap in my team is, like I said before, let's say like you already have like a DPS carry setup. It's completely fine to take a Tahm Kench, Olaf, Kennen, Lilia just to have a good balance between a frontline and a backline. And the opposite is true. If you already have a tank, you really just want to take something like even an Evelyn or a Jinx is fine. So Tahm Kench, I would put Bruiser in A tier. Country is S tier if you already have an Urgot. Urgot is one of the strongest early game units. He is probably the tankiest unit you could put your tank items on in the early game, so that's why I have him in the A tier. Lilia is in the A tier as well. In my opinion, the best one is Superfans. The reason why is because you get a really early 3-item Lilia setup. You get the Superfan item, you have your 3 components. Hopefully they're both tank components, and for the fourth component, you just make your 3rd tank item off carousel, and then you usually just streak all the way until stage 4. Same thing for Kennen. Olaf I would cop if you have like a lot of AD items, or you just don't really have a frontline and you already have a Tom Kench. Olaf is perfectly fine to take. And Yasuo, I would probably only cop Yasuo if he's an edgelord. It's just because edgelord is harder to hit. If you take the true damage one, it's not as valuable because it's super easy to hit true damage. And if you don't have edgelord, then you would need to look for Kale +1. If you do have edgelord, you only need Kale. Yasuo with the right items can 1v5 their entire team. He really likes stuff like Edge of Night, IE, Hodge. Last Whisper is fine too, but probably you don't want to build into Last Whisper. He's really good at holding the standard level 8 traditional melee AD carries, AD carry items. Like Even Shroud. Even Shroud is fucking broken on Yasuo. But yeah, these are basically all the 1 costs. Okay, so on to the 2 costs. So the 2 costs will apply for stages 2-3 to 3-2. This is the stage interval where, like, let's say like you were greedy and you didn't look for 1 cost. These would be the 2 cost headliners that you generally want to look for. There are also times where like you 5 lose into 3-2, and sometimes you want to roll for a new headliner at 3-2. This list will also apply to that roll down as well. So in this S tier, we have Heartsteel Aphelios. The reason why Aphelios is an S tier is because if you have Heartsteel Aphelios and it's the mid game, there's a very, very high chance you get 5 Heartsteel in the mid game. You go for 2 Giga Cash outs and you just win out. Rapid Fire is not as good as, in my opinion, because like, I mean, Aphelios is still like a pretty good DPS unit, really good at holding your AD items, but yeah, I think Rapid Fire Aphelios is just A tier. I actually think that Seraphine is S tier. Reason why is because she's like the perfect item holder for the 6 Sentinel Ahri board. And her mid game is quite strong if you get KDA, because it's really easy to fit in 5 KDA and 3 Spellweaver with Echo. And it's just a super, super smooth transition to Ahri, which is almost always a guaranteed top 4. I would also put Senna in the S tier. In my opinion, Senna is not as strong as she used to be, just because like Fast 9 is not as good anymore. You can't play into Sona Ziggs, but she's still a pretty good item holder for both the AD and AP carry, surprisingly. She's good at holding Ahri items, so blue buff, Nashor's Gunblade. She's also good at holding the AD items, so you go like red buff plus 2 AD items is fine as well. And in the A tier, we have Jax. The only reason I put Jax in the A tier instead of S is because you can only play Jax into the reroll Jax comp, and you can't really tempo with Jax. Tempo Jax sucks ass. But if you get EDM Jax, it's S tier if you're planning to play into reroll Jax. Sentinel Garen is S tier as well. He's probably one of the best tanks you get at 2-star. Sentinel is the better one in my opinion, because you play around 4 Sentinel mid game and you can angle towards Ahri as well. You could also angle towards AD Flex because he's a 2-bit if you play around Caitlyn late game. Gnar is A tier. In my opinion, Super Fans is the one that you really want to cop. This is because you get 4 or 5 Super Fans in the mid game. And itemization for Gnar, I would really prefer like bruiser-ish items instead of AD items. The only reason I don't really like Gnar is because at the beginning of the fight, he just jumps into their team like a fucking idiot. Like Gnar, just his headliner bonus is that he auto casts at the beginning of the fight. But like this is actually like not good for him because he just gets himself killed for no reason. So I usually just backline him so my front line could actually take some damage first before they start targeting my Gnar. Gnar generally like cannot really hold like straight up AD items for like Ezreal, Caitlyn, just because he gets way too squishy. But that's the thing with him. He's still a pretty good take if you have the setup for him, but that's the only thing. And Kaisa is really good as well, in my opinion. Okay, she's not really good. She's like a pretty flexible item holder because she could hold both AD and AP items. She could hold like the Ahri items, blue buff, Nashor's Gunblade. She could also hold like the Ezreal items, blue buff, red buff, IE. Really flexible. KDA, you can play into 5 KDA mid game. Yeah. Okay, so on to the 3 costs. I feel like the 3 cost headliners are like where the players struggle the most with, because they don't really know when to swap over like their 1 cost headliner to the 3 cost one. There are really only 2 different situations where you play on a 3 cost headliner. The first situation is like, let's say you pick up like a random 1 cost headliner early game just to play a board and save some HP, and you naturally find like one of these 3 cost headliners. Then you would basically want to sell your 1 cost headliner, swap your board to the 3 cost one, and build a board around that headliner instead. The second situation where you play around 3 costs is if you just have a terrible opener, no good items early game, you just full open, and then at 3-2, you roll for a 3 cost headliner and 3 Heartsteel. It's super important to also find the 3 Heartsteel, because if you end up rolling at level 6, you want to be able to match the pace of the lobby and go 8 on 4-2 as well, and you can only do that by playing 3 Heartsteel between 3-2 to 4-2. Otherwise, you're going to be too broke and you have to 8 on 4-5. On to the tier list. S tier is going to be Amumu, Yone, and Set. Amumu is probably the strongest tank in the game just because he also has like a shit ton of CC and damage as well. Amumu, I would just itemize him with 3 tank items. You could also go 2 tank, 1 healing. So for example, you go like, if you go 3 tank, you just go Bramble, Crown Guard, Warmogs. If you go the healing route, you go like Crown Guard, Titan's Hodge. That way it lets Amumu go infinite 1v5 and heal back up. Yone and Set are only S tier if you get the Heart Seal. Only reason is because you get 5 Heart Seal in mid-game, go for 2 Giga Cash Outs, and just win out with your resources. In the A tier, we have Mordekaiser and Echo, 2 of the best tanks mid-game. You just put 3 tank items on them. Samira and Urgot. Okay, so Samira is interesting. I would cop Samira in only if I have AD items on him and on her, and I didn't have a Corki. If I already have like a Corki headliner, I wouldn't always take the Samira just because like Corki is 3 gold whereas Samira is 9 gold, and like Samira is like a bit stronger, but Corki like saves you more money to play around the 4-2 spike. If you get Country, I think Country is better just because it opens you up to reroll Samira, and it opens you up to a very, very strong mid game with 5 Country as well. This Samira is just going to be Elas with Samira GS. These 2, any 3 tank items is fine. And then Urgot, again, same reasoning as Samira. Country is better. And then you can also tempo to level 8 with just 5 Country. You don't have to play reroll. But this is going to be red buff +2. The +2 could just be any tank items or any AD items. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 costs. So the 4 costs are probably the most important headliners you want to keep in mind just because these are going to basically determine what comp you want to play at level 8. So at level 8, when you roll down, you really want to keep an open mind about the 4 cost headliner you find. So for example, like if you want to play around Ezreal, like you don't really only want to be looking for Ezreal, right? You should be open to looking for Blitzcrank, Poppy, Thresh, even like a random Zed, random Caitlyn, random Zac, all fine. You shouldn't really greed your headliner just because like the chances of you finding the exact headliner you want at level 8 with 30 gold is very, very low. So it's better just not greed these 4 cost headliners, find the first acceptable one, and then just build a board around that headliner. So in the S tier, we have Blitzcrank. Sentinel is going to be S tier just because it's like the best, literally the best headliner you could get to play into the Ahri board. The Ahri comp right now, in my opinion, is S tier at level 8. You're stable off a good frontline in a 1-cost Ahri, and you go straight to 9. You don't even need 2-star Ahri. That's why I think like Blitzcrank is more important than Ahri herself, because she already does so much damage. Even if you just find like a random Sentinel Blitzcrank, you don't even have to play Ahri. You just play like a 4 Sentinel mid game with like a random AD flex board like Caitlyn. You can flex in Garen, and then if you're playing Ezreal, you can flex in Heartsteel for the Giga Cash Out with Cassante because he's a Sentinel as well. Ezreal is in the S tier if you get Heartsteel. This lets you play 5 Heartsteel mid game and then go straight to 9. Ezreal is also really strong with blue buff, red buff IE. It's fucking broken. Big Shot is slightly worse, but playing around Ezreal is always good because you can still fit in 3 Heartsteel. I would also put Poppy in the S tier as well, just because I think like Poppy, in my opinion, is the strongest standalone 4-cost tank. Not only just does she do a lot of damage, if you just put 3 tank items on her, a lot of times she just goes infinite, and then you whatever damage you have in your backline, you'll eventually like kill off their entire team. I think Poppy, you can either go 3 tank items or you go 2 tank, 1 healing. So for example, the 3 tank, you go like Bramble, Declaw, Warmogs, that's fine too. The tank healing route, you go like Titans, Hodge, like BT or Crown Guard, it's fine as well. You just put whatever tank items you already slammed on your Poppy and she will do just fine. In the A tier, we have Caitlyn. So Caitlyn is S tier if you have True Damage Spat. Actually, if you have True Damage Spat, it makes Caitlyn S plus tier. Otherwise, I would just put her in A tier. She's a really, really strong generic AD carry. I would probably put a red buff plus 2 AD items on her. Probably GS plus IE. If you have the True Damage Spat, it's probably going to be True Damage. GS plus 1 would be her best in slot. I think 2-bit is a better one. But because usually you end up playing a second rapid fire anyway in the late game or early late game. Like for example, a lot of the time you just tech in Philios at stage 4-2 for 3 Heartsteel, and late game you just tech in Lucian for Jazz. I would put Ahri in the A tier just because Blitzcrank is more important than the Ahri in my opinion in the 6 Sentinel board. But if you already have like a solid front line in the Sentinel board and you just find an Ahri and you don't really have any Ahris, this is really, really good. This also opens you up to like the traditional KDA board where you play around 4 Sentinel, 5 KD instead and dual carry the Akali, and that's fine too. Best in slot Ahri is going to be blue buff, Nashers, and Gunblade. So for Akali, I would put Akali in the S tier if you have a true damage spat. This lets you immediately have a secondary carry with Akali, and then you just true damage your primary. It's usually going to be Zed, Caitlyn, or Ezreal. If you're playing around true damage Akali, her best in slot is probably blue buff plus GS plus 1 healing item, probably Hodge. If you're playing the KDA version, it's probably red buff IE plus Hodge. I think Executioner Akali is the weaker one, yeah, that's Akali. I think Zed is really strong as well. Crowd Diver is the better one because it opens you up into 6 Crowd Diver at level 9 with Kiana, and this is probably a win out as well with 6 Crowd Diver. Best in slot is going to be GA Hodge plus GS in my opinion. And I think the EDM is a lot worse just because you need to play an extra Crowd Diver shitter to get like 4 or 6 Crowd Diver in. And Thresh is just a very good generic frontline that you can pick up in any comp as well. Guardian is the best one. Country kind of sucks because it's hard second 3 country at level 8. Just put any 3 tank items on this guy and you're good to go. Alright, so finally, let's talk a bit about the 5-cost headliners. So these are the headliners that are probably the most, or like the least likely you're going to be playing around just because it requires you to get to 9, and even if you get to 9, it's kind of hard to find them anyway. But in the S tier, I have Kiana. Kiana is fucking broken if you find her at the 5-2 roll down, just because you just triple item her and then she will start farming you infinite components, and she will also start scaling her AD. So like ideally you go, so there's 2 different builds you go for her. You could go like the survival one where you go GA blue buff and Hodge where she just casts infinitely and heals back up. You could also go full damage instead where you go IE, Hodge, and Even Shroud. From my experience, this usually farms you more items and is better for the Kiana if you find her early. But in the late game, if you don't have like a chosen Kiana, then this is better because she will give you more items to your team throughout the fight instead of like farming you components permanently. At times, if you don't have items for Kiana, like let's say you had to put all of your AD items on your Caitlyn or Ezreal, it's perfectly okay to just triple tank items your Kiana, just because it'll give her more survivability, and if she's alive longer, she's going to ult more, which will give you more items. So you just put in whatever items you have on her, and then usually you just win out. Both of the frontline headliners are in S tier as well. In the late game, the most important thing is like your frontline. It's pretty hard to find like a good frontliner in the late game. You could always get the damage from somewhere else. And in the A tier, these are like more situational. I would only take these if like you don't already have like a strong 4-cost headliner set up and like it's a strict upgrade. So like for example, like if you're playing around like an attack speed or like bruiser comp like Zed and you find like a chosen Jhin, like you're probably not playing around this Jhin. Jhin needs like a very specific set of items. He likes blue buff plus 2 AD items. So like let's say like I would take Jhin if like you're already playing around the Ezreal. You have blue buff and 2 AD items, then I would take this because it's a strict upgrade. Kayn, I would only cop if you have like a lot of AP and healing items. So for example, like Hodge, JG, Spark, Gunblade. Kayn kind of needs like a specific like setup to work. But if you're playing around Kayn, I like to greed in 3 Heartsteel late game and just play for the win out. Ziggs is like interesting, like because like even if you hit chosen Ziggs, like he can't really like single-handedly carry your late game fights. It's usually like Sona and Ziggs that like combo together that carry you the fight. Because like Sona sort of like enables Ziggs. Like the moment Sona casts, Ziggs will just do infinite damage and then Sona will just cast again. So for Sona, if you get like Sona, I would only copper if you have like Shojin Guinsoo's, and then you just like carry the Sona. The thing is, if you're playing Sona, you kind of need like another source of damage because Sona can't do the damage by herself. She needs something like a Ziggs or like a Jhin or like an Ezreal Caitlyn to be a secondary carry, or else like you're not going to have enough damage. And then Lucian I would probably only take if you have like the correct items for him. He really likes stuff like IE, Last Whisper, Guardbreaker, Red Buff, Gunblade. And if you're playing Lucian, you really want to try and fit in Jazz late game, and you want to make sure that, okay, for all of these A tier ones, you need to make sure that you already have a good front line, or all of these headliners are fucking garbage. That's why like Kiana's S tier because she farms you more items, which is more frontline. Yorick's S tier because he's frontline. Alawi's frontliner or is S tier because she's frontline. So that's sort of like the 5-cost headliner tier list. It's all about frontline, and then all the A tier ones are the carries, and they're situational depending on your spot and your items. All right, so this sums up my 13.25 headliner tier list. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel or followed me on Twitch. Again, by the time I post this video, I will be streaming. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in my chat or just drop by and say hi. Again, reminder, I do have another YouTube channel with VODs where I explain my games and commentary. So would appreciate it if you guys checked out that YouTube channel and subscribe to it as well. And I'll see you guys next time.